I'm joined by my good buddy, groomsman, reciprocal groomsman. Not a lot of people can say that, but a guy that I have a ton of respect for, mentor of mine early on in my basketball career and now life career. And anyway, man, I just appreciate you coming to the studio and having a conversation. That's what this is intended to be, is just a conversation from, when I got done with sports, I was in the search of a new scoreboard. That was a mentality for so long, those that have played sports for so long, and kind of just stemmed the idea of let's get some people in here that have maybe struggled with the same thing. Maybe had a transition from whether it's college or professional athletics to the business world, which is vastly different, but there's a lot of transferable stuff, and let's just talk about it. But before we get there, I just kind of wanted you to introduce yourself, maybe your current role, kind of what you're doing, what you're excited about, and all that different stuff. And then maybe for the listener, I'll give a little background about your sports career and all that good stuff.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me, TY. And first of all, I would like to make a comment that you, there's no way you enjoyed me mentoring you while we were teammates, at least initially. There's no way you actually enjoyed that, but we can get back to that later. I know, it's pretty tough on you. Thanks for having me. I think what you're doing here is not just cool, right? We always talk about, you and I have great conversations about, finding the right content, the right story. I also think it's just needed, period. I don't think I can really trust anybody who hasn't struggled after being a college athlete and going into the quote-unquote real world, and I'm really excited to take a dive into that. It's really good timing because I've actually been studying this and talking with a lot of athletes about it. But right now, I'm a college basketball analyst for CBS Sports and ESPN. I've been doing that with ESPN for almost 6 years. And with CBS Sports, this will be my 5th year. I'm really excited about it. I've had an opportunity to grow on each side, and it's the funnest storytelling. I can't believe this is an actual job they're paying me to do job. It's really cool. That's the night job. And the day job is I work at a boutique private equity firm, and it's something that I never actually had an anticipation getting into. It was a windy road to get there. I had no business background. You know me, I had zero business or financial background in college, and now I work at a very small private equity firm, and it's absolutely terrific. I work with a great duo of guys, and it's a lot of fun, and I enjoy the creativity and business acumen that I've learned across the way. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, man. It's funny. I'm laughing at because sitting here having this conversation now and knowing when we met, when I guess you would have been 21, I would have been 18. And yeah. I do remember you saying, man, you make money and you put it under your mattress, man. You can't trust these banks or some joke like that. It's just like,
I'm still a little bit of a cash guy. I don't fully understand Bitcoin yet. I understand the power of Bitcoin and why it's needed. But I still have, may or may not have money buried in the backyard of my house, but that's not a conversation for this.
You and every other drug dealer, man.
Yeah.
So a little bit about your career, I think, to give context too. Tell us about that, right? You go out of high school. Give us some accolades. Give us some of the metrics, although you don't want to brag on yourself.
You're going to have to do that.
Largo High School, one of the top point guards in the state coming out, or were you technically a shooting guard,
I don't know why I picked basketball because I have the body of a ping pong player, and I picked basketball. 5'10", in college is 5'10". Well, I had, with the right shoes on, 5'11". I was pushing 5'11".
I think, which is, to get to 5'11",
yeah,
is a big deal.
That was in the program.
You were 5'11" in the program.
Oh yeah, and that's what counts.
Were you pushing the media team for 6 foot, or were you just that's a reach?
Well, that was way reach. I was pushing the media team to get me at 175 in terms of weight because I was really about $162. And what's funny is I was actually talking with my dad about this, and we talked about how I was just a skinny, wiry kid. That's who I am. That's who I was. I was still who I am. I would lose an average of 15 pounds every season.
I remember that.
So there were times where I would start maybe at 165, and I'd be down to 150, sometimes even below 150.
Yeah.
And you talk about the things you would go back and do again. I would have totally changed my thought process on meals.
Right.
Totally, completely changed it. I would have thought about food as fuel instead of a meal. And if I would have done that, I just think things would have been a lot easier for me. I was just tired all the time. But that's finding. You talked about accolades. Like, look, I was raised to be even keel. My dad used to always tell me the Larry Bird quote all the time: never get too high on your highs, never get too low on your lows. It was really about, are you all in every practice, every game, every day? And that sounds extremely cliche, but it really gave me great horse blinders and pushed out the I mean, I was County Player of the Year. I was a McDonald's All-American nominee, and I didn't know any of that stuff happened until they actually told me, because at home it was never about successes. It was all about, did you give every possible thing that you have? If I was honest with myself and to my parents to say yes, then their love and support never wavered. It didn't, none of the accolades actually mattered, and that foundation for me actually served me really well, I think. Mm-hmm. And so I was able, the recruiting process was insane, and ended up started my career at NC State. Started at NC State and got to play against Duke in North Carolina. It was fun. It was it was a blast. Sometimes I had imposter syndrome, like when you're playing at Cameron Indoor Stadium. Like, am I supposed to be here right now? Why am I switching on the screen on J.J. Redick? I don't deserve this.
By the way, I wouldn't know what it's like to play at Cameron, so I was going to ask you if you played at Cameron, because your NC State team, that was a good NC State team. Julius Hodge, right? So you got to play in those places.
Well, we went in and out of the top 15 throughout the course of that season. It was a great team. Julius Hodge was an All-American. He was ACC Player of the Year. He was just Freshman of the Year when I came on. And he really there's some great Julius Hodge stories there we'll come back to in a second. But the playing before camp, I grew up, when I fell in love with college basketball, because you and I both love college basketball, there's just something so tangible about it. Even when I go back and think about how I would fill out a bracket, even in 5th grade, because I just thought it was the coolest thing in the world to fill out a bracket without even knowing who the teams were.
Right.
But I fell in love with college basketball because of Duke, because of watching Duke games and how they played, and Cameron Indoor Stadium, the Cameron Crazies. It was incredible, and it was just it was almost a tangible experience to actually watch that on TV. It's like, I want to be a part of that. So playing against Duke, when they were number 1 in the country, we were 14th at the time. They had J.J. Redick, they had Chris Duhon, they had Sheldon Williams. They were I mean, they were the number 1 team in the country. And I puked my brains out before the game.
Yeah.
I was so nervous that I actually called my mom, and I was like, Mom, I just threw up. I don't know what to do. And
Am I going to die?
Yeah, because I was more of like, meat and veggies guys. I didn't know all the stuff, but I knew enough to where, like, you don't eat ice cream before a game. You don't eat.
Obviously.
Yeah. And she goes, why don't you just have some peanut butter crackers and a Coke? Okay. I'm like, what? I can't do that. She goes, well, if your tummy's upset, direct quote, have some peanut butter crackers and a Coke. And I'm like, okay, it's what Mom says. And so I did, and I actually ended up having a pretty good game and felt good, but Cameron Indoor Stadium, Lord of the Rings just came out, so everybody just called me Frodo Baggins. And I had the big floppy hair, and I was taking the ball out of bounds, and they were so close to you, they were actually touching and flapping the back of my hair.
Wow.
It was an unbelievable experience. I remember checking into the game and being really nervous and excited, but my whole body was shaking, and I said, well, this feels a little too visceral for how nervous I'm feeling. Mm-hmm. So I was like, something's wrong, and the floor was shaking, and a pencil actually fell off of the scores table onto the floor, and the floor was shaking so hard because of how heavy the Cameron Crazies were jumping that the pencil was getting air on the floor.
That's crazy.
Just literally bouncing on the floor like it was an earthquake. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't feel as bad now. I thought I was having like panic attack.
Yeah.
But it was just the experience. It was great. So I went to NC State, and then I transferred to UCF and started 3 years there. I was captain for 2 years, and had loved everything about the process at UCF. It was a cool time to come in. My first year playing was the first year in Conference USA. It was the jump from the Atlantic Sun to Conference USA, which, without getting into too much detail, it's a pretty big jump.
It's a huge jump.
And then my senior year was the first year the new arena opened on campus, a 10,000-seat beautiful arena. So I kind of got to go out with a bang, and it was just an unbelievably surreal experience if I go back and think about it. Truly blessed. Played for you and I played for Kirk Spiro. Just loved everything about it.
So what's also interesting is that you transfer from NC State to UCF. They're in the ASUN, right? Take the leap to Conference USA. But then it's like, okay, you had Duke and all them in the other conference. And then you have a Conference USA team. Those Memphis teams were ridiculous, right? You had...
Well, for 2 straight years, that Memphis team was really...
Top 5 in the country?
Well, for 1 year, my junior year, they were number 1 in the country.
Joey Dorsey.
Chris Douglas Roberts.
Yeah.
It was Derrick Rose.
Yes, crazy good.
Insanely talented, and they were on really an athletic speed and physical level way, not just above Conference USA. I mean, that was a team that could have won the ACC, the Big Ten, the Big 12, the Pac-12.
Yeah,
they
no
were
doubt.
So talented. John Calipari as a coach. So, yeah, the difference was some of the teams in Conference USA at maybe the bottom.
Right.
You really couldn't compare to the bottom of the teams in the ACC at the time. One of the worst teams was Virginia
or Florida State, which is
Clemson.
Still a pretty good program.
Yeah,
right?
it was still a really good program. So it was the top of Conference USA was really good. Those Houston teams were really good, and obviously the Memphis team teetered in and out of anywhere between being ranked number 1 and number 5 for essentially all 3 years of playing in Conference USA.
Yeah, and that's where we met, right? So I got in as a freshman, walked on, and I'm put in the room with 2 of the older guys, and Mike's one of the older guys. By the way, one of the first things Mike did was came up. I remember visiting. We were at the Towers where we lived at UCF, and introduced them to my parents. And I don't even know if you remember this, but you were like, you know what, man, I'm just so glad you're here. I kind of heard about you, and obviously I came to play maybe once or twice before that. And that was just so welcoming and comforting, says a lot about you, but nevertheless, that's where we met, just roommates, couple guys in a dormitory. I don't know if you have that recollection.
You're not telling the right story. You're being really nice for the podcast, because here's the
story.
That did happen.
You're right. That was true, right?
But 2 minutes before that conversation, our head coach, Kirk Spiro, comes up to me and he says, because we're about to play pickup.
Yeah.
And he says, hey, you see that guy over there? He wants to be on the UCF team. And I said, yeah. Who is he? He said, his name is Taylor Young. He thinks he's pretty good. I said, okay, great. That's good for us, And he goes, he thinks he's really good. You need to get after him and pick up.
Oh,
and I was like, really?
I think I'm hearing this for the first time.
I've never told you this before.
No.
I said, wow. I said, okay. He goes, because I want to see, I don't want you to take it easy on him. I want to see what he's really got. And I said, okay, it's not like I'm going to not play hard. I mean, why are you?
Right.
This is if you don't know anything about me, this is the one thing you know about me.
Yeah.
I said, okay, sure. So I was like, boy, gee whiz. I mean, this guy seems like a really nice guy. I'm going to go over and say hi to him. And that's when I actually said hi.
So you're like, hey, man, I'm going to come say hi to you, and then we're about to play, and I'm really going to go after
I'm going to rip your soul out. You know what I mean?
And I'm certain that happened that day. Because
I
remember the first couple times playing pickup, I'm like, uh-oh.
No, you fouled a lot.
Yeah.
And I didn't really call fouls much, but I really liked that. And I went after you because I fouled a ton. Everybody hated. You remember?
Right.
Nobody liked playing against me because I fouled all the time. I just knew how to foul.
And then if there's an unwritten rule, right? If you call a foul in pickup, I remember calling a foul when I was actually still a high school kid, and I thought somebody was going to fight me because I called a foul, and I was like,
yeah.
So it's just kind of a rule. It's an unwritten rule that, like, unless it's really a foul, you don't call a foul.
Yeah, I learned that the best skill development I ever received in my life was playing in a rough area of St. Pete.
Right.
Playing pickup outside by the beach in a rough area of St. Pete where, I was allowed to play because I had some type of skill, but I wasn't allowed to say anything.
Right.
I couldn't call a foul. I mean, or I couldn't argue a foul. And I needed to keep my mouth shut and get my teeth kicked in. And I was like, okay, this is what it's really about here, because I'm playing against these guys. I'm like, why aren't these guys playing overseas? I mean, why aren't these guys playing the NBA? They are 1,000 times better than I am. And I was the Pinellas County Player of the Year, and these guys are 10 times. I mean, so much better. I mean, I can't even say the skill, the speed, the understanding of the game. And so I learned that. I'm like, I have to take this type of mentality to college. And that was the difference that I think, the main difference with when you're talking about level of programs. When I was at NC State, when I played pickup, sometimes I would get a text. I'm like, hey, we're going to play pickup. I'm like, it's 1:30 in the morning. What are we doing? I've been asleep for 5, you know me, I've been asleep for 5 or 6 hours. I am full in REM right now, And so we get and play pickup. I'm like, man, it was so physical and intense. And I almost want to use the word angry on how competitive it was in pickup. And I remember asking one of the guys, he was a senior, he was the captain, Scooter Sherrill, great player, played overseas for a long time, great three-point shooter. I go, hey, are all these pickup games really intense? He goes, yeah, man, we're all trying to make the league. That's one of the primary differences of where you got every single guy there knows when you're playing in the ACC, you're trying to make the league. And that was a huge whoa moment for me of where it took it to, and he turned the dial to 11, right? And I said, not that I wasn't playing hard, but I said, I get it. This is a different culture.
There's like a level of commitment and standard that's just like so much higher than like, hey, we're here, we're having a good time, we're getting an education. Yeah, of course we would like to play professionally, but maybe there's not really that level of belief from a macro standpoint. I mean, because there's, we played on a lot of teams. Maybe there's a few guys that have NBA hopes, but I mean, in reality, most people know they're likely not going to get drafted, and they're really looking to put together really good resumes to get on a good professional team overseas or whatever. I don't know if that was your experience, but I always kind of felt like there's a few guys per team max, but for the most part, the NBA is just not on 12 guys' minds.
But here's what I loved about it. And you're exactly right. And there were plenty of choice words that we won't say in the podcast that would have gotten, bleeped out. Sure. I don't know if this is a public podcast or not, or anything. We don't know. It's the first one. We can take it anywhere we want.
It's inaugural.
Yeah.
Is that the right word, by the way? Inaugural.
Yeah, okay. Absolutely. So there were fights. There were fights at the pickup games. I would say every other pickup game, and it was never about. It wasn't about something. It wasn't about points or what's the score or travel. I mean, it was always about fouls or someone not going hard or someone not rotating. I mean, it was like actual coaches on the floor. And as I remember going to try to break up fights and then getting stopped from breaking up the fight. And I'm like, guys, hey, we should all be getting along. We're teammates, They're like, no, you gotta let them have at it. I was like, okay. And I'm watching this, and they go at it for a second, and then shake it off, and then we check back up again.
Yeah.
And for those of you not listening, in pickup, you check the ball, you pass it back and forth to actually once just to start the possession. And then once the fight ended and once the game's ended, I'm like, oh boy, the locker room's not going to be a good situation.
Right.
Ended immediately.
Fine.
As soon as you walk off the court, ended immediately. I think about those moments all the time in business, in life, when I'm talking with companies, or if I'm talking to a group of college athletes. That type of switch, knowing that this to me is the most powerful thing about former athletes and current athletes that they don't actually realize, is your ability to flip a switch of not getting so emotional that it affects your relationships. To me, that's a massive, underappreciated, quiet skill set that employers love. And it's so layered in that to where, you can get the basic stuff. Here's what everybody talks about. Like every athlete that goes to an athlete seminar about getting a new job. You employers love, hey, you're hardworking.
Right.
You know, you were a teammate. You didn't have a choice. You understand what a team atmosphere is. You can get yelled at without crying.
Right.
You know, you can do all this stuff, and that's just kind of like what the outside world perceives what an athlete's supposed to be like. But if you really peel back the layers and think about, you know, if you're in a corporate setting, how do you simultaneously support your coworker but still go after maybe their job? That doesn't that never happens. It's all political, or you crumble and get fearful of the moment. I mean, if you think about the power of the skill set of being able to do two things simultaneously, treat fear as fuel and forgive yourself in a microsecond. Those two things are a massively important skill set to any employer, because you aren't affected by someone being angry, someone calling you out, someone getting a job, getting a promotion. I mean, T.Y., think about it. I mean, you should be able to, you could speak to this too. I mean, think about the number of times, not just in a year, not just in a day. I mean, think about the number of times, not even in a practice, in a drill,
Right.
that you failed.
Yeah.
And your window of time to feel sorry for yourself is non-existent, because you know that it will affect my playing time. It will affect how coaches view me. It affects me in a negative way. I have to have, in a microcosm of a segment, I have to not just embrace failure, but I have to embrace forgiveness simultaneously.
I was going to ask
We
you about
never
that.
think about that. And that's such a, the ability to forgive yourself instantaneously happens every single day that you're a college athlete. Every single drill, every single play, every single practice, every single game, you have to forgive yourself immediately. And once we get into the corporate world, you are surrounded by individuals who won't even come close to not just embracing that, but can't possibly fathom that mindset.
That is such a unique perspective on it, because one of the things I wanted to have a platform like this to talk about is you hear all the cliches about why you hire athletes.
Hate it.
I know,
Hate
me
it.
too.
Hate it. The hashtag more than an athlete is the worst branding initiative in the history of college athletics, and I'm happy to get into that in a second. I cut you off. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, man, but you hear that, right? And they tell you that all throughout. You're a student athlete, employer, you know, like we go to a million of those events, you know, and it's not that they're bad inherently. They're good. It's just lazy. I'm always looking for the thought of like, what really makes a former college athlete special? And what you just hit on is huge. I didn't even think about that. Most practices, one, it's hilarious because almost every single practice you get into it with somebody, right?
Yeah.
Every single drill.
You and I got into it
all the time, right? I remember. I'm specifically thinking.
You're Grims at my wedding.
You know, you get hit with an elbow where you know the kind of guy did it intentionally. You're being a little aggressive, and then you break practice and you go shake hands and you go eat lunch at the cafeteria. Like, I never thought about the muscle that trains, that you're able to be competitive yet collaborative. You're able to, take things personal in a drill, so you drives a little bit of your behavior, but then not take them personal in a macro standpoint where you're actually, to your detriment.
It simultaneously trains your empathetic and mental toughness muscles. Mm-hmm. And it really is. I've thought about this a lot. I've started to really study this because I think hate is a strong word. I've disliked a lot of the narrative around that you have to be more than an athlete. More than that. Do you actually realize what
how much
life all encompasses?
Yeah.
And it's not talked about enough. Sure. And here's where a lot of some of the disconnect is, because I'd like to come back to this, and I'd like you to speak to this as well, because I think, at your company, you guys have a spectacular culture of not just team awareness in pursuit of a goal, daily, yearly, future goal, right? And most companies don't have that, and that's an attribute to you guys. Where a lot of athletes fall into the system, because so many people in the corporate system lose a complete understanding of what their personal consciousness is. And they lose sight of that because if you're in a corporate setting, we can get bogged down in completing tasks, looking over our shoulder, just trying to keep our job. Then what that trickles down into is, well, that person makes more than me. Why is that person getting promoted? That's just the way it is. There's nothing you can do about it. Everybody says what they want to say behind closed doors. And we all do it, but in a vacuum, it's so dangerous to do that. And if you look at college, athletic practice and games, if you aren't speaking, you aren't bringing any juice, zero. But why you have the freedom? How many times do head coaches talk about, we want you to speak more. You got to be more vocal.
Be more vocal.
Get on your teammates and
clap.
You may be wrong. You may get called off for it. We want you to clap. We want you to hold your teammates accountable. This is where there's this huge disconnect. Is you've got the freedom to be vocal, to voice maybe something you dislike, to voice something that you disagree with, but you're not coming at it from an angle of where I think you're completely wrong. I mean, this
or I can just say exactly whatever I want in the same context without consequence.
There's a layer of respect that goes with that. But you have the freedom to do that because your head coach has outlined your daily, weekly, monthly, and seasonal goals. And so if you fall within those parameters of, I'm calling you out, but I'm calling you out because I know exactly what we as a collective unit are supposed to accomplish. There's a lot of freedom in that, and and with that freedom there's a lot of trust that my head coach and our team, we have the same goal. We're moving forward. In a corporate setting, I don't think you can say that for 95% of companies.
So interesting, because it's been top of mind for me lately, being outcome-oriented versus task-oriented. And if you're outcome-oriented, meaning if you understand that you're aligning on the same monthly, daily, weekly, yearly goals, it kind of doesn't matter how exactly you get there or how you go about it. And an athlete, whether you have to call somebody out, whether you have to take somebody to lunch, right? It just matters that we share a goal and we're gonna progress towards it. And I think that is a little disconnect. It's like you can have way more autonomy and freedom as long as that is supporting what we've all agreed that the mission is this year, right? Like if you're telling me as a coach that I need to look at something a little different because it's going to potentially help us, get towards the mission, that's different than just telling me you want something different because you just don't like it, just because it's not fair, whatever it is. And that's another thing too, in regards to the construct of athletics. You also get used to things. You get used to things not being fair. I mean, I don't know. I've always told growing up, like, life's not fair. That was one of the things my parents said.
See, I disagree with that thought process. Not totally, but I don't think it's you get used to life not being fair. You get used to being held accountable for everything. But subconsciously, you also get used to all of your teammates being held accountable for the exact same things.
Sure. And I guess to expand upon that, it's an arena that you go, okay, one, I earn my spot. Right. So what I mean by not fair is you're not going to start at the same spot. Right. If a college recruits a 5-star athlete with potential to go to the league, and you're just not going to be treated the same as a walk-on or somebody that, at first it's going to be an uneven playing field. Right. In certain capacities. But you have the opportunity within construct to bring energy, bring great attitude, bring vocalization to the practice, do all these things that allow you to earn the respect of your team and your teammates, and then ultimately have more of a voice and then be able to have more impact and contribution. So I don't know. I always appreciated that part about athletics because it's like, look, and then you're also used to people, hey, great, you're doing great. We appreciate you, but we're going to try to recruit people that are as good or better than you every single year. And they're going to come in and they're going to compete for the position, but you're just used to it. You're like, that's normal, It's a
great point. And you just are transitioning me into something that's really cool that I think I've been studying recently, and that's stockpiling skills that you may not even be aware of. When you're an athlete, sometimes you're LeBron James. Sometimes you're Taylor Young.
Yep.
There's a huge difference between LeBron James and Taylor Young, and I mean massive. Massive difference, right? But if you aren't gifted with certain skills that are just inherently going to make you so much better than everybody else, and even outside of athletics, some person, I'm not, I'm an average intelligence individual. There are so many that are so, so smarter than I am that I'll never be able to attain that level of intelligence. And so they're where they are. They see things differently. They understand things differently, and that's awesome. In athletics, you are subconsciously taught to stockpile your skills. You start with the fundamentals, right? In basketball, you start with the triple threat and dribbling and passing and proper shooting technique. And you may not be the best three-point shooter in the world, but you're a good three-point shooter, but you're also a good defender. You're a great teammate. You bring a ton of energy, and you're a good ball handler. That's called stockpiling your skill set for success. We never talk about doing that in the corporate setting. We never talk about doing it. Yeah, because it's usually just about, am I keeping my job? How do I get to the next job? Why is that person getting that and I'm not getting that? I'm doing this, and this. And we never talk about stockpiling our skills. That inherently what you're doing is protecting your downside of not being reliable. If you're able to stockpile your skills and then own your skill set, you don't just become reliable, you become different in, Taylor's great at selling, but man, he's actually, he's a great coworker. People really like working with him. He brings a great attitude. And then all of a sudden, you're great at this, and then it's A, B, C, D, E, F that goes along with it. But here's where the difficult transition happens. In college athletics, being an athlete, you always stockpile your skill set because your coach needs you to stockpile your skill set and then tells you not just to stockpile, but how to stockpile. Yeah. So you're given the keys. You're given the keys, the engine, the papers, everything you possibly need to own this car. Yep. Everything you possibly need. Now, you have to go do it. Yep. In a big corporate setting, even in a small corporate setting, I don't think that exists.
I couldn't agree more. And what you're saying is so gold, because I'd never thought about it that way. Because I was just going to say, well, what does your coaching staff do every time you leave before you leave at the end of the year? The season's over, usually March, right? If you're lucky, April, and then you go into the summer. And usually every summer of me growing up, I would go to my coach. I mean, I'm talking about back from 9 or 10 years old, because I had some really good coaches. And there was always this theme: what do you need to work on this summer? What do you need to work on this summer? Yeah. Right? Like you just said, well, hey, hey, you're not a good enough shooter to play right now. Hey, look, you're a good defender. I think you described me, right? When I got to school, I wasn't.
I didn't want to actually, because
But it was just like reality. I remember after the first year, Coach Spira sending me down, like, look, man, like, I don't know how he said it, but how I heard it was, if you're going to really want to play here, you need to take all the things you currently do well that we appreciate, but you need to become a better shooter. And in order to do that, you need to get 500 shots a day. You need to do whatever it is. And we don't do that in a corporate setting. And then all of a sudden you end up over a long period of time saying, man, that guy can sell, he can lead, he can market. But if you would just take those skill sets, I don't know, maybe we're not patient enough with ourselves. Maybe we don't make it objective enough. Why don't we do that as professionals? Or maybe some do, but maybe some don't.
Oh, that is a phenomenal question. And it's a question that always needs to be asked and discussed. And where I think the huge disconnect ends up coming down to community. When you're in a collegiate athlete community, whether you disagree with someone politically, whether you look like that person or not, whether you come from the same financial background or not, none of that stuff matters. Everything's about attaining a goal collectively. And that goal is usually written and agreed upon by everybody, right? It's goal-setting theory to the max. Mm-hmm. Everybody understands what we're supposed to do. And if you're not doing your job, we're not going to attain this goal. So there's an accountability factor, and there's a good teammate factor in that the rules are written on the board, the goals are written on the board. It's not like we're just pulling something out of thin air. But that's where the community comes into play, of where there were guys, Taylor, you could speak to this too. There are guys that I just couldn't stand that I played with. I mean, truly.
Oh, yeah.
I couldn't stand playing with them. But I subconsciously always respected them because they went through the same crap that I went through.
Yeah.
5 o'clock in the morning doing sprints forever, and they went through the same stuff. They agreed upon the same goals. Yeah. They went through the same drills. Yeah. They were in the locker room. We went through the same failures and successes together. But it didn't matter because that community agreed upon, this is our goal. So the macro outweighed the micro for me. And you transition from that. We don't ever talk about it because it's really kind of deep stuff. And you can, as a head coach, you can only talk about so much stuff to where I couldn't comprehend this when I was 19 years old.
He was like, are we getting a milkshake at film session?
I was an idiot. Like, yeah. Oh, man, those are the best. Get a little malt, chocolate malt milkshake. Fantastic. Yeah, it's awesome. When you transition from that subconscious community of goal setting, of where you can simultaneously not like someone but respect someone because we're going for the same goal, into selling insurance, is that company doing the same thing? Mm-hmm. And so here's what happens. There's this really scary trickle-down effect of where, oh, hey, this is what life's real like. I'm not getting yelled at all the time. I don't have to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning. This is great. I get to control my own destiny. And then you see someone complaining about something, and you say, oh, why are you complaining about that? This is just the way that it is. Don't work past 5 p.m. because nothing. I've been doing it for years, and nothing's ever happened for me.
Yeah.
And you're like, nah, that's just that one person. And then you go into a monthly birthday cake, and someone's complaining about, this person got a raise and I didn't. I'm like, what did you do to earn a raise? Or what happened? It doesn't matter. It's just political. Yeah. Okay. And then you start realizing, am I surrounded by people that are all in for what we're supposed to do? But even more importantly, do I know what I'm supposed to do? I know not what I'm supposed to do? Do I know what the goal of the company is? Right. Yearly, quarterly? Yep. What our mission is? What our daily goal? I'm not 100%. I've been in that situation. I don't know if I could say that. I'm not exactly sure. So then you kind of have two choices. Do you just continue to work hard and think that this is what life is actually like outside of college athletics? Or do you say, no, man, I don't want to run from something. I want my cup to be overflowing to where I'm sprinting towards something. Mm-hmm. So when you leave a community and an environment that is, the backbone of it is passion, into an environment of where it's hard to find passion from an accountant, what are you doing? Mm-hmm. That has such a drastic effect. It comes in drips of where it's really easy. You can be a hardworking person and just have that constantly dripped, every day of where this is just the way that it is. I guess it's political. Taylor, it happens everywhere, and it may not even be aggressively toxic. Right. The slow drip sometimes is the worst because you could look back 10 years later, I'm like, I'm just coasting. I'm working hard. I'm making money. I actually like the people I'm working with. They're not bad people, but I couldn't tell you what I'm passionate about. I'm at a point in my life where I refuse to get into anything unless if you have the exact same passionate, overfilled cup that I did when I was a college athlete. I'm not getting into it. I can't do it.
That's very cool. And do you think that's a transition out of it? So also, I'll catch up. So you finish at UCF, have a fantastic career. I mean, you're revered at UCF. I mean, you're one of just the all-time best teammates.
Don't say
no,
stuff
you
like
are.
that.
You are. Yeah, you went straight into broadcasting with my now colleague Mark Daniels, which led you to, when you talk about stockpiling skills, I don't want to skip over this, because the broadcasting thing, right? All of a sudden, it's like you get out of college, you never done broadcasting. Yeah, you're on a camera, but you don't even realize that. You're a player. They start interviewing you after games, and then all of a sudden, hey, Mike, you want to do the radio? Ah, yeah, I never done radio before. I'll do the radio. And then now it's so cool that you've taken all those stockpiled skill sets, built upon them, and now you're calling games for ESPN and CBS Sports and doing all this cool stuff. But, that did happen over a decade, 5 years, 6 years. So it's not like it happened overnight.
When I was done playing at UCF, I worked at UCF for a long time in a number of different avenues. I was the chief of staff for the athletic director. I did fundraising. I coached for a year. Was a grad assistant, did a lot of stuff. And then I as a kid, I would watch SportsCenter twice and memorize SportsCenter and always think about this would be the coolest thing in the world to do that. It was just awesome, right?
Totally.
It just total kid in a candy shop type stuff. Yeah. Really, at the end of the day, that's what it was. Thought it was just so cool. And I felt like for a large portion of my life, I was working really hard, always getting after it, but almost simultaneously passionless. And it was addicting. And the reason why it was addicting, because I had to think about, am I having kind of like lazy think? Am I feeling sorry for myself? Be grateful for what you have.
Right.
I had a great job working at my alma mater, surrounded by people that I liked. I met my wife at the job that I worked at. It was, that's a great scenario for a lot of people. Yep. And it was a great scenario for me. But I was still coasting. And until I realized it was addicting to constantly thinking about, well, just be grateful for what you have. Not that the mentality of being grateful for what you have is a bad thing. It's a important thing. But it was almost kind of, I guess I was putting a mask on almost, of using that as an excuse not to be truly happy with what I was doing. And so I made a decision. I said, it took me almost a full 2 years of identifying the thing that I had the same passion for as an athlete. Almost just literally 2 years, I would think about it every day. I would write things down. I would pray about it. I would literally just be quiet, almost meditate about it. And then what really kicked it in high gear for me is when I actively sought out successful individuals that I respected and just talked to them about it, is what really kind of helped me formulate who I wanted to be and what I wanted to do. And then it was a lightning bolt. I'm like, it hit me when I was broadcasting a game with Mark Daniels. I'm like, yeah, I love doing this.
Yeah.
I'm going after it.
Wow.
And
really?
So
I never heard that part of it.
I'm going after it. And it just clicked after a game. I'm like, holy smokes, this is it. So I had no brand, zero brand whatsoever. I had no connections whatsoever.
Yep.
I had, really at that time, social media, Twitter was just getting to be a thing. Right. I had no following, I didn't even know what Twitter was. And I just started, I said I had to do two things. I had to leave the current situation I was at because I had to control my own destiny of essentially my schedule. Mm-hmm. And so I started a nonprofit in Winter Park that allowed me to control my own schedule and still do things that I like doing. And I just networked like crazy, like a complete and total maniac, to the point of where I know I annoyed people. And then I ended up getting a shot. I ended up getting a shot at ESPN of where I annoyed this guy so much. He's like, hey, can you do these 2 games? Absolutely. Let's do it.
What was that moment like? Which is like absolutely resounding yes.
It wasn't, what's funny is it wasn't like this huge, end of a movie, fist pump scene where everybody's jumping. I broke out into a full sweat.
Yeah, no. Actually, now I have to.
I was like, this is all right. All right, let's go. Let's go. And it just, eventually trickled into more and more and more games. I'll tell you this story. I networked like crazy. And I flew up to the headquarters of a major media industry on a whim of a text.
Yeah.
So, would you like to get lunch? So I paid for my flight in the morning. I flew over there in my finest Kohl's suit.
Oh yeah, nice.
Right off the rack. Guys, I show up at a little sports bar, and the guy's like, "Why are you wearing a suit?" And I said, I don't know. I just wanted to let you know that I'm not just some punk kid that's doing this for fun. And I sweated completely through that suit, you know. And we talked about everything, and I had no idea if it worked. I flew out the next day. I said, I don't know if that even amounted to anything, and I ended up getting a game.
So you a text, do you want to grab lunch? Yes, I'll fly up there the morning of.
Do you want to grab lunch tomorrow? Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah.
And of course, you're paying for your own flight.
Yep.
There's no guarantee.
Zero.
There's no even conversation of like what you're maybe even going to be talking about.
That's right.
And you just show up in a suit and you just basically show this guy, hey, look, I'm committed.
Yep. Yeah, you want to change something, you risk catastrophic failure. And that could be terrifying, and it was terrifying. But if I didn't do that, nothing would have changed. And to me, that was worse.
Oh, God, that's so good, man.
It was worse. It really was.
Yeah. Yeah. What's the other option? Not doing something, not taking that level of commitment and continuing to live. And, what's interesting too, is this is on my mind a lot lately, is the difference between and or. I think things don't have to necessarily be so binary. So when you were saying, oh, well, be grateful for this job. And you're basically saying, like, in your mind, you can either be really grateful and appreciate what you have, or you can be this workaholic go-getter that, doesn't have good quality relationships and never, but you don't have to be or. You could be and. You could be grateful what you have and pursue a passion of yours. You could be grateful what you have and go after everything you hoped and dreamed. You could be grateful it's like, so I think that was like your transition from or to and, where you say, you know what, I can do this. And then your mind starts going, okay, well, what would I need to do this? And then it's the first step. Well, I need to control my schedule. So what would I have to do? Okay, this opportunity, this non-for-profit. Okay, I got to get networking because I got to build this so I can do this other thing. So I think that's beautiful how it worked out. So tell me about the first couple games and then kind of how that took momentum and where that led.
I was terrified.
Yeah.
I was
Did you puke?
Absolutely terrified. No, I've kind of felt like it. I will tell you, I distinctly remember holding the microphone and seeing the microphone in my hand just shaking. I was really nervous. And the guy the first game I did, his name was Jim Barber, and awesome, fantastic individual. He had been doing it for 20 years. He's a very, very good play-by-play guy. And he pats me on the shoulder. He goes, hey, man, you're going to be awesome. And he goes, don't worry, I'm going to lead you in everything. And I was like, oh, man, that was great. That was great for me.
Gift,
that was great for me. Yeah, he was just a super guy. We still text, fairly often. He's a really good dude. And it went, I think, pretty well. I don't know. It's kind of like, I blacked out, don't know what happened.
Right.
But I was really prepared, and it was just an incredible experience. And after that, I was like, this is it for me, because I'm either all in or I'm passionless now for my life. That was just that's like the backbone of my mentality for pretty much everything right now, whether it's family, work, and that's when I knew. And that road it's still a very frustrating road because I have an ultimate goal. I want to call an NCAA tournament game. Mm-hmm. That's my goal. And I haven't even called a postseason game for CBS Sports yet. I'm still earning my stripes, and I have to navigate those windy roads. And there's no actual ladder because it's entertainment.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're either popular or you're not. I'm never going to be a popular person. So what can I be instead, while still inherently not not completely changing who I am as a person, which is kind of a tricky avenue to navigate.
Right.
And the pursuit and the frustrations that come along with that pale in comparison to how much passion I have for the pursuit. It's really, really fun.
What a cool journey that is transferable too, because isn't that what we're all looking for? Because basically what I heard you say is like, how do I not just morph into this character and basically act in a way that I know people will like or what they already value and demand, but how do I take like myself and create really cool stuff that they may like. I think that's a subtle difference between, I think anybody that gets in, even when you transfer to business, like getting a sales and a marketing role or whatever, and you're like, yeah, but I'm not really like this big extrovert that, wants to go out and, well, that's okay. Well, how do you take your balanced introvert and do it in a different way that the outcome's the same, right? The outcome for you right now is like, look, how do I create a level of demand and attention from the viewership and from the network that I get an opportunity that progresses? And so it doesn't really matter how you get there, whether you do it in a creative way, whether you do it in a funny way, whether you do it, but you just have to find like this unique version of you that like you still enjoy doing it. You're so passionate. It's, it comes off that way. I just think that's cool. Because I think most people don't have the quiet time or the challenges that actually ask themselves those questions. I think more times than not, you're just trying to create yourself into a person that is not you, but will maybe get results.
Oh, it's hard. I tell you this on a podcast and make it sound like it's easy. It was 2 years of self-reflection. It was really hard. And there were days where I would legitimately get really mad at myself, get mad at the world, get mad, not to where I was ungrateful for what I had, but just why do I feel, the burden of complacency 24/7? That was just maddening to me. It drove me crazy, and it took me all over the place. And until I started having more conversations and actually thinking about, what do you love to do? That question was posed to me. What do you love to do? I didn't know how to answer.
Me neither.
Easiest, like the most obvious, easiest, should be the easiest thing to answer. What do you love to do? And I couldn't answer it. And that made me even more angry and frustrated that I couldn't answer the most simple question. I had a master's degree, had an undergrad, college graduate, college athlete, all that stuff. It just doesn't matter if you can't answer the basic questions about yourself and why we're on this earth. What are you supposed to do? I was like angry to the point of embarrassed. So I went down a few rabbit holes of, probably just shouldn't have, in terms of just being mentally, just blaming myself for so many things. Not to the point of where it was just, it affected my work, but I would bring it home with me.
Right.
So I had to make a decision of thinking about, I went back to some of that stuff as an athlete, and I think you got to shake some of this stuff off and go figure it out. Mm-hmm. The path to success for everybody is different, and I don't necessarily gravitate towards the path to success. I gravitate towards the path to happiness and passion. And along that way, usually success happens. It's kind of like the, protecting the downside and let the upside take care of itself. The downside for me is I never wanted to get into a place where I'm passionless. That's my downside. That's the floor for me. So the floor is passion. So if I can be on that pursuit of passion and happiness, for me, and it's different for everybody, but for me, the success has come along with it. Relationships have grown. Business has been good. The growth inside the broadcast industry has been, it sometimes been a step forward, two steps back. But if I lose focus, if I get into the comparison game, I start saying, oh, I'm taking a step back. If I focus on protecting my downside, I start seeing little opportunities pop up. I'm back on the right path, and that's, as smart as anybody is, nobody ever can see the end of it all. But if your baseline is firm, chances are you're going to see the little micro things along the way that keep those motivators healthy.
Yeah. It's like the reticular activating system where you see a car and then all of a sudden you can't unsee it. But I like how I think everyone should do that too. A couple pieces of advice, like creating your own framework. Like I think like you just walk me through that framework and that makes complete sense. But even more important, it makes complete sense to you. It drives your behavior. So for you to be able to set a floor and talk about downside versus upside, that framework works for you. Another piece of advice that I wish I would have gotten earlier that I've kind of learned lately is notice. Just pay attention to what gives you energy and what takes away energy. You don't have to judge it. You don't have to say you should be this way or you should not be this way, but what gives you energy? When you go through a day, because another thing you learn as an athlete too is like you're going to do stuff that sucks. I mean, no one wants to run sprints, right? I mean, even with the idea that even if you want to play in the NBA,
90% of it's terrible.
Right? Yeah, it's like you're mostly doing things that you don't like, right?
Right.
So you also get very comfortable with that. That is normal. So that's a little bit of a balance between finding passion. I think people mistake living passionless versus it's going to be all gravy. It's almost like there's this expectation that it's not going to be hard. And it's not one or the other. It's like, I loved basketball, but I also hated it a lot of the time because I didn't like waking up and my ankles hurting. I didn't like going to weights, most of the time. You know what I mean?
It's just you always complained about your ankles back then. Yeah.
Man.
Yeah, you had bad ankles. You are dead on. And if I could add to that, I would say the backbone of everything you're talking about is community. I think it's everything now. And I think we are simultaneously now more connected than ever, but very little of it is tangible. And I think it's a dangerous place to be. For me, a really good light bulb for me about 4 years ago, and I didn't really come up with this myself. It was really from one of my business mentors talked to me about this. It is something that I'm inherently good at, but I think for a life perspective, even outside of work, everybody talks about having a great community is important and it's impactful. And it's true because what you're saying, when you talk about how do you wake up and how are you motivated, a lot of times you'll learn that from someone else. Or you'll maybe just see that someone's really happy. I'm like, why is this person happy? Yeah. He has the exact same, or she has the exact same job that I have, and they're just happier than me. Well, why is that? Well, that's someone inside of your community that you should gravitate towards. But for me, my network is currency. And I'm not talking about making money from my network. I actually believe that my network is life currency for me. My network will never stop growing. I love learning from people. I love being the dumbest person in the room, and I love asking questions. That network then becomes part of your community. If you have a community that is simultaneously individually motivated for themselves to do well, and then motivated to give advice or support or encouragement, that is really powerful. That is a tremendous recipe for success for an individual. And your community can be outside of your current workplace. It doesn't have to be in your workplace. Yeah. Sometimes it's really, really hard to find a community that we're talking about inside of a big corporate unit. But until someone tells me otherwise, treating my network as currency when I say that, I don't mean it from a selfish, I'm getting from someone. I mean it from, it's so motivating for me from a subconscious standpoint and from a growth standpoint that I'm like, every time I meet someone that is new, that wants to engage with me, I'm like, I want to be associated with this person. I want to learn from this person. I understand that this person can have a huge impact on my life, even if that huge impact is changing my frame of thinking 1%.
Yeah.
I'll take that 1% all day.
That's a cool way to view currency. Because people talk about your network. It's about, it's all about who you know. And I always come back to something I feel like I've learned along the way that's true to me is like, it's about who you know, but it's also about how they know you. And that's the way I view networks, right? It's like, it's one thing to know a bunch of people, right? But it's also this reciprocation of like representing yourself in a way that you're also somebody that they would want to know too. And I think both of those things, when it comes together, currency is a great word for it because it could be anything you do. It could be life advice. It could be introductions to people that you need to meet for business. It could be whatever, right? Those kind of two-way reciprocal relationships drive the world, and that's a great philosophy. You've been a ridiculous networker in the last, I would say, 6-7 years. where you're constantly like, hey man, you got to meet this person, you got to meet this person, and it's awesome, and I borrow from that. So a couple things. By the way, I'm really enjoying this. I'm
having a great time.
But this won't be the last time you're here. I'll tell you that right now. You'll be probably hosting this thing before it's all over. Is what advice would you give somebody transitioning from athletics that maybe isn't that cliche, stuff that we heard throughout our career, but is stuff that you learned that you were just going to boil it down and say, you know what? I would encourage you to do this. I would encourage you to go talk to this person. I would encourage you to think this way. Is there anything that sticks out over and above that if Mike O'Donnell was getting out of school right now, that you would, your past self, you're able to feed him this piece of advice?
Network like crazy, like a total maniac. Slide in everybody's DMs. Everybody that you think that is interesting, because
sure.
I've had 5 different jobs since, quote unquote, 5 jobs since I graduated from UCF. I didn't know what I wanted to do till after 7 years of employment. 6 years of full-time employment. That was, everybody thinks you got to figure it out when you're done. Right. Don't feel like you've got to know exactly what you have to do, because there's a really good chance, more so than someone who hasn't been an athlete, you just haven't either had it's almost just stamina to think about what you want to do outside of what you're currently doing, because it's so all engrossing every day. Of just surviving practice and surviving
protein
school.
Shakes. I'm trying to keep weight on. I'm not thinking about what I want to do.
Just trying to get sleep. I'm so tired all the time. But I would network like a total maniac, like crazy. I would. There's no finish line for that.
Okay.
And I would sit down and learn from people. Go to coffee. Go to lunch. You'll find that everybody's really excited and really appreciative to not just talk to a former athlete. But if you're coming at it from a humble perspective, I just want to learn a couple things from you.
Sure.
Everybody's willing to give out free advice, and successful people usually have it.
I know I would, for sure. And now being in that position, if somebody were to approach me, I didn't do that aggressively enough. I love that piece of advice. And then lastly, look, man, you had a lot of game back in the day. As much as you want to push it to the side, you had a lot of game. I would consider you an athlete, not the most athletic athlete, right?
That's true.
But quite an athlete.
Fair.
At a high level.
Fair.
But one of the questions I want to ask you is, like, since you transitioned from athletes to the glory and the prime of your career, when you're squatting and bench pressing and running and jumping and scoring points, and all of a sudden you're a professional, like, what is the dumbest injury that you've had that, like, you knew in that moment, you're like, man, the glory days are over?
There's probably about 15 of them. I'll give you the most recent one because it's totally ridiculous. And it was about 4 months ago. You're going to relate to this because you and I both have low back issues, right? Severe low back issues. So I still try to keep in shape. And every once in a while I'll go play pickup. And I played pickup about 4 months ago, and it was a blast. It was a lot of fun. It felt good to run around out there. I was dog tired afterwards. Right. Stretched a lot before, took ibuprofen as soon as I was done,
all the things.
A cold shower. You got to prepare for it. What's coming. The next 48 hours are not going to be good. And it was at night, and it was a Tuesday night. I remember it specifically 4 months ago. School night. I have 2 kids that are both under 6, and it was my turn to bathe. And so, I threw them in the shower, and, just bending over after playing pickup for me is a difficult situation to be in.
This is close to
So
home.
I knew that going in, and my son Luke's a little guy, and so, he got bend down, he just comes up to my knee and trying to, put shampoo in his hair. And I knew that bending down for that was going to be an issue.
Right.
A real issue. And so I said, okay, I need leverage.
Yeah.
So where our shower is, we've got to step into the shower, you have to actually just step over this little barrier.
Okay.
It's about about 4.5, 5 inches to step over it into the shower.
Right.
And so I said, like any good athlete, I'm going to use leverage to my advantage, and I am going to position my left foot against the barrier so that I can use that as I'm bending down to prevent my low back from completely destroying itself.
Totally understand and following you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And most parents will understand you got to use that little edge to lean in. I do that. I didn't see there is a piece of the tile that is cracked, and I sliced my pinky toe wide open.
Oh, man.
And I just couldn't get it to stop. I couldn't get it to stop bleeding. I thought I was going to have to get stitches. I eventually, it took days. Like, I was
screaming, like, Annie,
No, because I didn't want to see my son. I didn't want my son to see me, be soft.
Yeah.
Even though there's a pool of toe blood.
You'd rather bleed out than
we had to
your son
throw
see
away
that.
this little rug, I mean, it was a bad deal. Yeah, I'd rather my son see me just unaffected. And it hurt like crazy, and it was the most annoying thing. I had so many. I was thankful I had so many Zoom meetings the next day because I was wearing flip flops with my button down. But yeah, because I was fearful of low back pain, it led into a situation where I couldn't wear shoes for 2 days.
Wow. I mean, I didn't see the toe slice coming.
Right.
I saw these other things like falling.
Yeah, I gave a little Norm Macdonald, rest in peace, switcheroo joke there.
I also love how your mind's working because like, hey, like, because if you're in a, maybe you squat.
We've all been there.
Yeah, like bend at the knees, not at the back vibe.
Yeah.
I'll tell you mine real quick and then we'll wrap up just because it reminded me of the low back. First of all, in my mind, everyone has low back issues, but maybe that's just because we always talk about it. Well, it's not like rare for us to have a beer and be like, hey, man, like you mentioned a couple of these stretches you do. Like, talk to me about these stretches.
We do that now, though.
Yeah, exactly.
We're both fathers now. We talk about low back pain.
And then I asked you, one time we went to the beach and I asked you, like, hey, man, like you mentioned, what do you, in your opinion, what's the best way to bend to get something on the floor? You remember me asking that?
Yeah.
You're like, hey, man, like if you have to think about it, like just I don't know what you said, but it was just like, your question's not good. You're going to hurt your back.
We have bigger issues.
So I'm about to go on vacation and I'm going to be at the beach, right? I'm going to be wearing sandals and I noticed that I haven't clipped my toenails in a while, right? I'm just going through the checklist before I leave and
pretty gross.
I'm going to clip my toenails. And so I sit down on the side of the bathtub like anybody would. And then I go to clip my toenails and I get to like toenail 3 and I go to, and my back just seizes up, and I actually do like a barrel roll, like it's like one of those, like and I was on the floor calling to my wife, like so dramatic.
Right.
Keep in mind, I didn't have a son that I was looking to like be tough in front of.
Yeah. So my question to you is, when the back pain initially happened, was it on turn into toe 3, or was it just on the clip of the toe 3?
It was on, like, it was almost like I was clipping, and then I would make sure that the toenails get into a place where they don't stay on the floor, right?
Sure.
So I'm piling them together. If anybody's ever clipped their toenails, but then so I would go up and down. I would clip up, and so it was going down on number 3, and then boom, that's when it happened.
That's a rough deal, man.
Well, and I was devastated. I'm a heating pad. I'm trying all the things. I'm like, I'm about to go on vacation. I'm not going to be able to walk.
I don't think there's a better precursor to describe fatherhood than your back going out while clipping your toenails.
The back takes a beating in fatherhood. A lot of bending over into the crib, the bathtub.
It's not talked about enough.
Yeah.
It's not talked about enough. I stretch just to be a father.
No, that's true.
Yeah.
People talk about like Tom Brady's doing like pliability and stuff. He's 44 years old playing in the NFL.
Not doing it for football. He's doing it to be
stuff.
a dad.
Yeah, and I got to do that stuff to be able to give my kid a bath.
Yeah.
That's kind of the beating that my body's taking. Well, hey, man, I appreciate you being on here quite candidly. Talk about things that give me energy selfishly. I could do this all day, and you've been gracious with your time. I'm sure there'll be a round 2. But, man, thank you very much.
I appreciate you having me. This was a blast.
All right, bro.